Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now live in studio is Dritan Nesho, pollster and CEO of HarrisX. Dritan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Brittany. Excited to be here.
It is a very exciting day in the studio. It is our first day we can reveal a HarrisX Forbes poll. It's a wide-ranging, and we are talking all about 2024. So to kick it off, let's talk about the incumbent, President Joe Biden. His job approval is pretty low at 39%. Tell us a little bit more about this.
Well, the president's job approval has been underwater for some time now, and it seems like there's two reasons why he's at 39%. On one end, there's a lot of concern about his age and his ability to see through a second term. On another end, most voters believe that he hasn't done enough on issues like immigration, fighting inflation, and really his approval rating is underwater on his handling of most major issues that are in front of the president and in front of his administration right now.
So when you think of these, it's divided into camps. First, the issues. Obviously, that can change. He is this week visiting the southern border, but the mental acuity, the age part, that can't change. So do you see or anticipate between now and November his job approval moving at all?
It would be a very hard pivot. It would be a hard pivot on the policy side of things. Issues like immigration, most voters are very frustrated around that issue. Overwhelmingly, they think it's the top issue now facing the country, and they don't feel that the administration has done nearly enough that it's in its power to act and to secure the border. So that would be a tough issue to pivot on. Inflation and the economy, there are some positive signals out there, but perceptions of the economy always lag by 6 to 12 months. And the big sticking point that voters have right now is the fact that inflation has affected everything from the price of the gasoline that they get to the price of the food that they eat. And these are real tabletop issues that they don't feel are being addressed nearly strongly enough by President Biden and the administration. I would be surprised if he's able to turn it around, but certainly we should start to see some action from the administration. They can't leave the president's approval rating and his reelection chances where they are today.
You're the expert here. You're a pollster. Historically speaking, is this precedented for a president, his last year of his first term, to have an approval rating that is below 40%?
There are some presidents that have come back from being underwater, not as deeply as President Biden is at 39%. Usually they are in the low to mid 40s, and they slowly inch their way up close to 50%. So it's not impossible, but certainly looks difficult.
So now let's talk about the general election. Presumptively, as of now, it looks like it's going to be a 2020 sequel, Trump versus Biden. In that matchup, Trump is beating Biden by 4 points. Tell us about this.
Well, this trends with most other public polls. President Biden has seen a drop in support among several key demographics that propelled him to victory in 2020. And we have to remind ourselves that that was a very, very narrow victory. In some cases, it was thousands of votes here or there in states that made the difference. What we've noticed that's very worrying about the president's reelection chances is that whereas he carried African Americans by 80 to 90% in 2020, he's only winning them by 60% to 40%. So we've seen a drop of about 20 points or more in terms of his support with African Americans. President Biden won Hispanics in 2020 fairly convincingly. Today, Hispanics are largely split, 47% for Trump, 53% for Biden. And most worrying of all is his support amongst women. Today, women are largely split between Biden and Trump, 48 to 52%. If you go back to, let's say, the midterms in 2018, Democrats were winning women by 18 points. And that support with women, the incredible support the Democrats had with women in 2018 and also in 2020 has consistently been shrinking up to the point now where there's really a marginal advantage at best amongst women. So these are very concerning signals, and the biggest fallacy amongst Democratic political actors today is the fact that the president's coalition is intact. It just isn't. And you don't have to trust any specific poll to see that. You can look at any poll that is out there and you see the same trends playing out over and over again.
I am curious as to where these demographics are going. Are they going from Biden to now Trump voters 4 years later, or instead is Biden potentially going to lose to the couch, to voters staying at home, or to voters voting independent?
Well, I think that if you look at it at the broadest level, the majority of voters don't want a rematch of 2020. 60% and even more in some cases don't want Biden to run again, and a majority also don't want Trump to run again. They have deep concerns about both candidates, around age and policy positions with Biden, and around character and behavior when it comes to Trump, who they find erratic. So we are in the dynamic that we are because a strong third-party option isn't out there yet. But if you ask Americans, would they consider a strong third-party option, and do they want another choice or another alternative between what they're getting right now, they would say yes. And that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, right now, if you look at the polls and you synthesize them, the country basically feels that its choice is between geritol on one side and vitriol on the other side. And it can do better. And that's where voters are.
I want to read a poll, or some numbers here from the poll. When it comes to mental fitness, 67% expressed doubts for Biden's mental fitness and 51% for Trump. So a majority of voters are concerned about both of their mental fitnesses. Have you ever seen numbers like that?
It's unprecedented. It's unprecedented in modern American politics to have two candidates that are seen with such levels of concern. The mental fitness question when it comes to Biden is really driven by concerns of his age and the fact that most voters feel that he will not be able to complete his term. So essentially, they're connecting the dots and saying a vote for him is really a vote for Kamala Harris. And she's even worse politically, doing even worse politically than President Biden is. When it comes to Trump, the concerns are around his erratic behavior, around the fact that he has overused, if not abused, executive privileges and power, and voters, have that top of mind. But right now, they're being forced into two bad choices.
And will voter sentiment around this, specifically mental fitness, change between now and November?
It's hard to see that happening. I mean, how do you do that, right? If you hide the president and you don't let him go out on the stump and on the campaign trail, you lose. And if you get the president out there, he frequently reminds people that he's up there in his age and that this is a very difficult and very taxing job that requires a lot of energy and stamina, both physical and mental. And I think that that's a very difficult perception issue, but really it's a real issue for the administration to address.
Critics have said that former President Donald Trump is a candidate that comes with a lot of baggage, and voters are concerned about a potential Trump second term. Can you talk a little bit about those looming issues voters are most concerned with?
Absolutely. The issues around former President Trump are really issues of character and issues of temperament. They feel that the president was absent on January the 6th, which is a day that looms large in the memory of most Americans, not in a good way. They feel that the president has too many legal cases for him to be efficient, and they're worried that these legal cases will bog down a second administration, that they will lead to another round of big-ticket impeachments that will cause the political system to seize again. So there's real concerns about Trump's viability as well. But right now, voters are looking at two bad choices, and they're really voting based on who they don't like, either because of inflation and economic issues or because of character-related issues.
Your numbers are really interesting here because they're suggesting, well, they're actually boldly saying most Americans don't want a 2020 sequel. Most Americans are concerned about Donald Trump's baggage, if you will. But in the GOP primary, he's winning handily against Nikki Haley. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's clear that it's Trump's party right now. And Haley is lagging him, and there's really no path for her to come through. Part of that is because Republican voters are starting to coalesce around their perceived winner. Now, whether or not that perceived winner amongst the Republican primary is a winner on the national stage, that's a big and open question. The determining vote will be independents. And what we see clearly with independents is that they're breaking, although marginally, but they're breaking in favor of Trump because they are very aggravated with the issue of immigration. They're very aggravated with the issue of inflation, and they don't feel that the administration is doing nearly enough around both of those key issues.
And if it is Trump's party, who do voters want to be his VP pick?
That's a great question. It seems like the Veep stakes are between Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy. We've asked voters what are the attributes that they'd like to see most in a vice presidential candidate, and they say that they want the vice presidential candidate, or whoever gets picked as a vice presidential candidate, to first and foremost espouse the MAGA policies that Trump has as part of his platform. Secondly, they want someone who is fit to lead and fit to serve. And the third one, closely following, is someone who represents a new generation of Republican leaders. So it's no surprise that the top two performing picks then are Ron DeSantis, who is seen as being ready to lead and has a lot of policy overlap with Donald Trump, and Vivek Ramaswamy, who is a new figure within the Republican Party, and someone that surged, perhaps unexpectedly, within the primaries. So it seems like it's between the two of them. Tim Scott is third in the top pick, at least according to voters nationally, Republican voters nationally.
Do Republican voters care about any demographics when it comes to a potential VP pick? Like, I would like to see a woman, I would like to see someone of a certain race, or that doesn't matter. They just want a figure who espouses MAGA policies.
The way that they're prioritizing right now is policies first, fit to serve second, and a new generation leader third. Diversity in the ticket, whether it's on the basis of race or on the basis of gender, comes after those first three variables or issues.
Dritan, I do want to pivot just a little bit, talk about one of the top issues, which is the economy and voter sentiment surrounding it. You have some numbers regarding this. What are they?
Well, perceptions on the economy are fairly negative. Only about 3 in 10 voters think that the economy is strong today. Close to half of all voters feel that their financial situation is getting worse rather than improving or staying the same. If you look at polling, historically, the two biggest predictors of performance at the ballot box are your job approval numbers and that question around, are you better off or worse off financially today than you were before? And both of those are essentially fairly negative numbers for President Biden and do not bode well for his re-election chances.
By most metrics, though, the economy is doing better now than it was a year ago, so why aren't voters feeling this way?
It takes time to merge the gap between perceptions and reality. The other thing is that also the economic green shoots that we've seen, the positive signals that we've seen, haven't been very consistent. And really the big challenge is inflation. We asked the question together with the editorial staff at Forbes, which is, how would you spend an extra $500 if that extra $500 was made available to you? And the top answer was groceries. That's striking. So voters wouldn't spend it on discretionary spending, whether for fun or other things, but they would actually spend it on food. And it makes sense. Voters are now starting to notice that the price of food, whether it's the milk carton or anything else, has risen fairly significantly, and that's in large part due to inflation. And that's a very difficult issue to address because the administration doesn't control interest rates, and obviously inflation is a very complex issue to tackle. It has to do with everything from spending all the way down to those interest rates.
You did mention that lag time where it takes sentiment around the economy to catch up, about 6 to 12 months. As you and I are sitting here right now, we're 8 months from the election. So is that potentially good news for President Biden?
I mean, under normal circumstances, if you had a president that is able to get out there on the stump and talk about the economy and change the sentiment, it could possibly be. I'm thinking about Bill Clinton reviving his electoral challenges after 1994, 1995, and winning in 1996. It's yet to be seen. I think there's a lot of focus on the president's State of the Union speech. That could be a pivot moment when it comes to his messaging on the economy. And then it's something that has to be closely monitored because the president is so old and because it seems like the momentum is not with him.
I've been really fortunate. I've got to travel the country from Iowa, Pennsylvania, everywhere in between, talking to voters. And one thing that is a constant theme, a thread, if you will, is that voters are not happy with the size of their wallet, the price of groceries, the price of everyday items. And President Biden put his name in his economic policy, Bidenomics. Is Bidenomics a strong pitch?
It's not. And we asked the question point blank. Do you feel that Bidenomics has led to you being better off or worse off? And net, people say actually it's made us worse off. And that's a problem for the administration. At a minimum, they have to rebrand Bidenomics, possibly as something else, in order to make it more palatable for the electorate.
Based on all these numbers we've parsed through just now, is there anything surprising to you, anything aside from the mental fitness portion that you've never seen before?
Well, both candidates are weak. They're weaker than they appear. The only reason why they appear strong is because there's no alternative choices on the ballot box yet. And I think that that's something that is striking. Often in elections, you have a candidate or two that voters like, and the task is really convincing that 20% in the end that likes both candidates just fine, but haven't made up their mind. I think that we're very likely to see a protest vote both ways, and the independents are the ones that will determine the election. And right now, those independents are leaning towards former President Trump.
I do now want to pivot just a bit to a different poll. A Harvard-Harris poll found the likability of political figures. Can you talk to us a little bit about the numbers here? Run us through what you found.
Sure. So President Biden's favorability in this case, not his job approval, but his favorability, was underwater double digits in this poll. He was, I believe, in the low 40s, and President Trump did a little bit better. I think he was by and large even. Maybe he was a few points net positive in his approval. But that's to be expected because he's not in the limelight. He doesn't hold the bag, so to speak, on all the decisions that are being made in the country. And as he comes into the limelight more and more and more, I would expect that favorability to shrink to something close to what we saw when he was president. And Trump is an interesting politician because he is a high floor, low ceiling politician. His support never really drops below 40%, but he can never really seem to break more than 45% in favorability or support either. So it'll be interesting to see the dynamic as it unfolds. The other interesting thing in the Harvard Capps Harris poll was that RFK Jr. had the highest net favorability of any public political figures out there. I believe it was plus 15 or plus 17 points. And that tells you something, again, about voters yearning for an alternative, someone different. So we shall see. I mean, there's still 8 months, as you said, until the election.
There's still 8 months, but as we sit here, like you said, Donald Trump is net positive at 3%. President Biden is net negative at negative 11%. Do you think this indicates anything for the upcoming election?
Well, it indicates that President Biden right now is the underdog. And he has to do more to revive his political chances than Trump has to. And that's in part, again, because President Biden is the key decision maker in the country and the economy today. And he holds responsibility, for better or for worse, for the last 3.5 years and 4 years. And this is a phenomenon that we see in all presidents. It's just that he is a lot more underwater than what we've seen before in presidents that have successfully come back and gotten reelected. But that being said, as you pointed out, there's real weaknesses with Trump as well, especially around characters. So in an election that is a protest election on both sides, where you have some voters saying that they can't vote for Trump because of character, and other voters saying that they can't vote for Biden because of the issues and because of his age, there can be an unpredictable outcome just purely based on turnout. Who actually is energized and willing to go out there and cast their ballot in an election that has very little enthusiasm for both of the candidates.
As your time as a pollster, have you ever seen a general election where it's a protest vote on both sides?
I think that the closest that we've seen is 2016 and 2020. I mean, 2016 was a protest vote vis-a-vis the political establishment, right? Donald Trump's big innovation in 2016 was to shift American politics from liberal versus conservative to elites versus non-elites, populists versus the elites. And he did that very successfully, and that's why he won. And he won also with the issues that he pushed forward. In 2020, you see that the reason why President Biden won was actually a protest vote against Trump and the excesses of the Trump administration. If you look at the exit polls, a fair number of Biden supporters said that they voted against Trump rather than voting for Biden. And that actually explains the president's current weaknesses, because those voters seem to have now changed their mind. And again, they are out there and looking at their options. So I think that this rematch or this rerun has flavors of 2016, has flavors of 2020. The protest vote is clear, and what's a potential X factor is whether or not there's a change vote on the positive side of the equation, whether there will be a third party ticket that will energize voters, as Obama did, for example, in 2008, when he was a political phenomenon in his own right, and then they start considering that alternative choice and coalescing around it.
As of now, President Biden, like we've been talking about, has that negative favorability. So does his vice president, Kamala Harris, at negative 9%. Is this common for the incumbent president, incumbent vice president, to have a negative net favorability?
Yes, it can be. Again, it's really the confluence of so many signals. Negative perceptions on the economy, negative perception on key issues like immigration, negative perceptions around the president's age and his ability to actually see through a second term, and then also negative perceptions about his number two, right? That really come together to kind of create the current dynamic. Any one of these signals on their own might not necessarily spell trouble, but all of these signals taken together are unavoidable. And again, whoever is running the presidential election campaign, I'm sure that they're thinking about all of these and how to counter them. It's just that they are running really out of runway, right? And you don't want to be a day late and a dollar short on these kinds of issues, because it takes time for voters to absorb your message. In political campaigns, we always say that you have to convey a message 10 times for it to be heard 3 times, for it to sync with the voter 1 time. And so that repetition and that frequency is very important. Now, the president does have a big war chest, and they have raised over $100 million to be able to drive this message through. This is the amount that they have in their war chest today, so maybe that'll make a big difference, especially if they're coming out of the gate early.
So let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about those figures with the highest net favorability. I'll read their names, and then I would like your response if you could dive a little deeper. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Elon Musk, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, and former President Donald Trump all have the highest net favorability in this set of political leaders. What do you think this indicates?
Look, I mean, I think that Donald Trump aside, right, when you look at RFK Jr., Elon Musk, Vivek, Nikki Haley, they are political figures that are gaining in awareness, right? And in the country, even the best known senator or governor has maybe 30% name recognition. So when you start running as a president or take over a very large forum like X or Twitter in Elon Musk's case, then you have a lot of attention on you. And the positive net favorability suggests that people are willing to give these figures a chance, they're willing to listen to them. And again, it's the trend that's the most important factor, right? To see whether or not they're able to sustain it or not. So far so good for all of them. And I think that each of them will play a role in the discourse of this election.
A trend that in that list is that there is not a Democrat on there. No Democrats actually in this poll have a positive net favorability. Is this precedented? Is this because there's a president in the White House? What's the reasoning here?
I think it's very telling. I think that's the only answer I could really give about that. I mean, the fact that the party isn't producing figures that capture the appeal of voters on a broad swath is problematic. And by comparison, the Republicans seems to have a better bench or a deeper bench when it comes to different figures and different candidates. Haley, as you mentioned, Ramaswamy. I believe Tim Scott also has had a positive favorability rating in the Harvard Caps Harris poll that we run in the past. So I think that's very telling and obviously not a good omen for the Democratic Party right now.
Let's dive even a little deeper there. More progressive Democrats, including Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, have worse net favorabilities than more moderate Democrats. What do you think this tells us?
The middle, the political middle in the country is big, it is strong, and it has been forgotten. And this is why you see independents rising in numbers. Gallup has independents now in the mid 40%, if not higher. In the last election in 2020, only about 28% of Americans identified as independents at the ballot box. And so you see voters peeling off from both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party because they feel that the parties have veered too far to the left or too far to the right. And they fear that the leaders of both of these parties, President Biden and former President Trump, haven't done anything to stem the excesses of the far left or the far right. And, you know, most voters want political compromise. Most voters are pragmatic and practically minded. They want things done. And that's not what they're getting from the political system. They're getting the digging of heels on the far extremes, and the country suffers as an outcome. And so that is part of the dynamic that's at play right now.
As we're sitting here parsing through all of these numbers about the issues, the candidates, the parties, what is sticking out to you as the expert, as the pollster, that you think is missing from the national conversation when it comes to the presidential election?
Well, I think that neither of the parties and neither of the candidates are focusing on tabletop issues. You don't hear a lot of messaging around the economy, even from the Biden camp, right, who needs to push the positive view on the economy. But most of what the current set of messaging is around immigration or the culture wars occurring in the country. So I think that both of the parties are missing an opportunity to actually meet voters where they are and speak to them in the terms that they want to be spoken to. The other thing is that compromise is not a dirty word, should not be a dirty word. There are a series of big ticket compromise positions that the majority of voters, starting from the center with independents but moving on to both of the parties, would accept. For example, on immigration, an overwhelming majority of Americans would accept a grand compromise to create strong and secure borders on one side, that's a Republican wish and position, in exchange for a pathway to citizenship for the dreamers, the so-called dreamers, the DACA recipients. And that would be a grand compromise that would actually move the country forward and give energy to both parties. But you don't see that happening. And when you do see a push or a move on compromise position, some element of the left or the right comes out and tries to break that.
I am curious, before I let you go, when it comes to the economy, what is the right message then from Democrats particularly? Because I had a Democratic congresswoman on, and she was saying, "No, the economy's good. The numbers are great. People's sentiment is lagging. It will catch up." But according to the poll here, the majority of people aren't believing the numbers that they see in the media. So what would be the right message? Because if people hear those numbers, they say, "Well, I'm not feeling that," and then that kind of ends the conversation.
You ask a very hard question. I think if anyone figures that out, then I think the dynamic of the election would change. I would say that there's a wisdom to the crowd and there's a wisdom to the general voter, which is reflected in what they see day in and day out. So if there are examples of the economy improving, then they will believe the messaging that the economy is indeed improving. For example, the rate of jobs in the country has increased, right? We are at a historically low rate of unemployment, but no one really talks about that or knows how to actually bring it to life. More actions are required around inflation, right? And again, borrowing a page from Bill Clinton in 95, 96, he had a philosophy of bite-sized government actions. Very concise, very focused government actions that meet voters where their needs are. And we're not really seeing that. We either see trillion-dollar bills or nothing. And I think that that's really something that's missing. But it's a hard question. I think that the Democrats are struggling to find a strong message on the economy, especially given the fact that voters seem to think in our poll 50-50 we're in a recession or we're not. So it's a very split picture. It's a very mixed picture depending on how you ask the question around the economy.
So leave our viewers with something. Based on our poll, what is your main takeaway that you want them to know before we head out?
Well, I think that we are being forced with some very hard issues, from the economy to inflation to immigration to abortion and beyond. And I'm hopeful that as the political parties start jostling for voters, especially the coveted swing voters and the coveted moderate voters in the middle, that some solutions will or should emerge. And if they don't, then really this election will be a race to the bottom, and we really have to then start looking past this election for new leadership to provide better choices, fresh solutions to the problems that are facing the country. So I think that the positive signal that I see is that we are actually starting to talk about everything that is wrong in the country. And, as an old saying goes, there's nothing wrong with America that can't be solved by what is right with America. And so I think that that's a positive note I'd love to leave the conversation with.
Dritan, thank you so much for our inaugural HarrisX Forbes poll. I enjoyed the conversation. Looking forward to many more soon.
Thank you, Brittany.